La Linea, chapter 11. It took me 3 hours to walk to the city, but it felt like minutes. I wanted to catch the bus north at noon. Then I'd be slightly ahead of the timetable set out by Don Clemente. I wandered around, peering into shop windows and pushing my way through the crowded stalls in the mercado. The city was a crossroads for a steady stream of people headed north, south, east, and west. Cars and trucks belched black exhaust that burned my eyes. The taxi drivers blasted their horns, and a loud whoomp whoomp of music blared from the speakers of other cars. Mid-morning, I stood in the shade cast by the giant wall of the cathedral and pulled the last of the tacos de cabrito out of my bag. The tortillas had turned hard and cold, but I ate every bite. 2 hours earlier, I found my way to the bus station. 2 hours early, I found my way to the bus station. What if the seats were sold out? I didn't think I could stand to wait for the next bus. I wasn't the only worried one. Dozens of anxious travelers sat side by side, their belongings stacked at their feet. I bought my ticket, found a seat on a worn wooden bench, and settled down to wait. An older couple sat across from me. They propped their legs up on a huge, bulging suitcase. He wore an old black suit, the shoulders dusted by dirt. She, too, wore black, a long dress with shiny buttons. In her hand she held a small photograph, its edges tattered and worn. She caressed the face on the photo with her index finger. I decided they must be going to the funeral of their only son. A young father and mother near my age sat on top of 2 boxes tied together with rope. They passed a baby back and forth, but it cried nonstop anyway. 2 more string bags held some fruit and drinks, a bean pot, a molcajete, a box of soap. This was everything they owned in the world. I thought they must be headed to La Capital to try out a different life. They'd still be poor there, it would just be a different kind of poor. I felt quick and light and alert. Everyone else seemed burdened, loaded down. My backpack and my pouch weighed no more than a feather. The bus finally pulled up to the station. The mother and father with the baby stowed their boxes, mounted the stairs, and sat at the front. An India, wearing a bright multicolored skirt and blouse, slid into the second seat. A shawl covered most of her face for modesty. She grabbed the ends and pulled it tighter around her neck. She carried only a small string bag. I decided she was going to help her sister who had just had a baby. I made my way to the back of the bus and claimed a seat next to a window. 3 young men settled down behind me. They didn't wear their traditional pants and shirts, but I could tell they too were Indios. Triquis, maybe Zapotecos or Mixtecos. They sat shoulder to shoulder, speaking softly in their own language. Maybe they didn't speak Spanish. Probably they just didn't want me to understand. 2 more young men grabbed the seat in front of me. One wore a New York Yankees cap facing backwards on his head. His t-shirt had a faded cartoon drawing of a square-faced kid with spiky yellow hair. The other man wore an Oakland Raiders cap pointed forward and a ragged sweatshirt with a Notre Dame logo. What's the name of the guy they told us about? Do you think we could find him? What if we can't find him? One asked anxiously. Would you stop asking me that? The other replied. I already told you 10 times. He used the annoyed tone of an older brother, one I used with Elena when I wanted her to shut up. I guess by their accents they came from Guatemala or maybe Honduras. A black man slid into the seat across the aisle. He was traveling alone and light like me. I nodded at him slightly. He returned the nod with one of his own, adding a shy smile. He carried one small backpack held together in some places by duct tape and in others by crude hand stitching. Out of this, he pulled a portable CD player. He fiddled with the earphones, adjusted the volume, and settled back, listening intently. Who was he? Where was he from? I finally decided he was a tourist, probably not as poor as he looked. Several other men entered the bus. Each was single, most traveled alone. I counted a total of 15 young men, including myself. I bet all of us had the same destination, somewhere across La Linea. Here we were together, close enough to touch. There, up north, one might go to Chicago, another to Atlanta or Michigan. What were the other places I'd heard about? Oregon, Yakima, Oklahoma, some place called Little Rock. Some were cities, it seemed. Maybe others were states. I wasn't sure. There was California, of course. I knew all about California. Finally, yet another man sat right next to me. I let out a big sigh. I wanted to be alone so I could stretch out a little and sleep. I knew I needed to rest when I could. But he was barely seated before he started talking, a fast-flowing river of words as if he'd been starved for conversation. Hola, me llamo Javier. You can call me Javi, he began. What's your name? I'm from El Salvador. You're from here, right? He paused only long enough to kick his backpack beneath the seat in front of him. He had silver hair and deep wrinkles around his mouth and the corners of his eyes. I looked closer. He was a lot older than anyone else on the bus. This is a good bus. I can tell already. You can always tell by the driver, he continued without taking a breath. I've been on 2 that broke down. Where are you going? Maybe we could go together. It's boring to travel alone. He looked at me hopefully. Don Clemente had warned me not to give away my route or my contacts. Besides, I didn't want the burden of another human being. So I lied. I'm going to La Capital to stay with my brother and sister-in-law. Javier's shoulders slumped in disappointment. But within minutes, his friendly talk started up again. Over the next hour, I found out he came from the mountains of El Salvador, somewhere. He used to work on a big coffee plantation. He left behind his wife and 2 children. I had no choice, he explained. The coffee prices went in the toilet. With no work, no money, what was I supposed to do? I'm going north, to New York, where my brother works in a restaurant. He can get me a job. Within a short amount of time, I'll have money to send for the family. He paused momentarily and looked at me more closely. You must be about the same age as my boy Eduardo. He wanted to come with me, but of course he had to stay to help out the family. He wasn't happy about it. You're not going to La Capital, are you? Javi said suddenly. It wasn't really a question. He hadn't believed my story. I've always been a bad liar. You could come with me, you know, he offered. He waited for me to answer. This is my second try. I've learned a few things, and sometimes it's good to have someone to watch your back. I said a silent thanks to Don Clemente. With his people and his coyote, I didn't need anyone else. If Javier had already tried once and failed, I'd be better off by myself, alone. The last thing I wanted was an old man tagging along with me. How much help could someone like that be anyway? Gracias, I murmured. I've got my own plans.